The parking lot at Harland Square Mall smelled the way all parking lots smell at the end of a long Tuesday motor oil baked into asphalt. The faint ghost of exhaust fumes that the evening breeze had not quite managed to carry away. And underneath all of it, the dry mineral heat of concrete that had been absorbing sun since 8 in the morning, and was only now at nearly 9 at night beginning to give it back to the dark. Most of Lot D was empty by then, the way the far end of a mall parking lot always empties. First, one row of yellow sodium lamps, standing guard over a handful of cars, the nearest lamp flickering with the slow, irregular pulse of a bulb that was maybe a week from dying. And between the columns and the shadows and the flat, dark expanse of painted asphalt, a man was standing beside a charcoal gray sedan in space 22, hands loose at his sides, doing nothing wrong. His name was Marcus Caldwell, and he had been standing there for 11 minutes. He was not pacing. He was not on his phone. He was not looking over his shoulder or shifting his weight or doing any of the dozen small, anxious things that people do when they feel exposed. He was simply standing there in a dark jacket and pressed slacks with the particular stillness of a man who has learned through long practice that stillness is not the same thing as waiting, and waiting is not the same thing as vulnerability. He was there to meet someone. That person had not arrived. What Marcus did not know yet, could not have known, was that the person he was waiting for had spotted a patrol car rolling into the lot from half a mile away, and had made the only decision the situation allowed, turning quietly and walking back the way they came, because some things are more important than any single meeting, and a blown cover is one of them. What Marcus did know, because he had cataloged it in the first 90 seconds after parking, was this: the camera mounted on column K7 had been recording since before he arrived. The loitering notice posted on the column to his left cited Florida Statute Section 810.09 and specified that business hours ended at 9 p.m. It was currently 8:41 p.m., and he had not been asked to leave, had not been given any notice, and had not refused anything. He also knew from the particular quality of the engine sound that had just entered the lot. Slow, deliberate, the rolling search sound of a vehicle that is not responding to a call and is not passing through. That something was about to change. Officer Travis Bowman's patrol car swung into Lot D and moved down the lane with the unhurried confidence of a man who has already decided the outcome of a situation and is simply driving toward it. The headlights swept across Marcus's car, then across Marcus himself, and Bowman slowed to a stop behind the sedan, rather than beside it, cutting off the lane in a way that was technically a parking decision and practically a statement. He sat in the car for a moment before getting out. In that moment, if you had been watching from column K7's camera angle, you would have seen a large man in a police uniform studying a man in a dark jacket, the way a person studies something they have already made up their mind about. Stay with this story, because what happens next, what those 11 quiet minutes in a half-empty parking lot set into motion, is the kind of thing that people who run on arrogance and institutional protection are absolutely certain can never happen to them. Travis Bowman was about to make the worst decision of his 19-year career, and the man he was walking toward had been trained for over a decade to make sure that decisions like that left a permanent mark. Travis Bowman had been a police officer in Harland County for 19 years, which was long enough to have developed a philosophy about the job, a set of beliefs about how power worked and who deserved to be on the receiving end of it, and a reputation that meant very different things depending on whether you were asking someone in the precinct or someone on the street. He was 47 years old, built wide and heavy through the shoulders and chest, with a face that had spent too many years in the Florida sun, and showed it deeply, lined at the corners of his eyes permanently, flushed across the bridge of his nose. The kind of face that looked like it was always slightly irritated, even at rest, even when nothing was wrong, as though irritation had simply become his default state after enough years of looking for problems to solve. He wore his uniform pressed and his belt polished, and he walked through public spaces with the rolling shoulder-heavy stride of a man who has spent so long being the largest person in most rooms that he no longer thinks about it consciously. But the thing that people who had spent any time around Travis Bowman noticed and remembered long after they stopped being able to describe his face was his hands. Specifically, his right hand and what it did when he was asserting himself or lying or doing both at once, which in Bowman's case was often the same thing. His right thumb would find his wedding ring and begin to roll it a slow, deliberate rotation around and around the base of his finger, the way a person might fidget with a coin, except that Bowman did not fidget. Everything Bowman did was deliberate, including the ring rolling, even if he had been doing it for so long that he no longer knew he was doing it. People who had been on the wrong end of his attention had learned to watch for that ring rolling the way sailors watch a sky that is starting to change color. In the break room of the 5th District substation, the other officers called him a straight shooter. On the streets of the neighborhoods where Bowman patrolled, the ones south of the commercial corridor, the ones with the older housing stock and the higher percentage of black residents and the lower percentage of residents who had ever successfully filed a complaint and had it go anywhere they used a different word. They called him a hunter. He did not patrol the way officers are trained to patrol. He had a mental map of where the real cameras were and which ones were decorative. He knew which mall security contractors reviewed footage only when specifically asked, and he knew with the bone-deep certainty of a man who has tested this knowledge many times that his arrests were going to stick or could be shaped into something that stuck on the way to the station. 3 weeks before the night in Lot D, Bowman had been working the afternoon shift when he saw a man named Deshaun Crawford walking to his car outside a grocery store on South Meridian. A black man in his 30s. Nothing unusual, nothing wrong. Just a man with 2 bags of groceries walking to a Ford pickup that was registered insured and legally parked. Bowman had watched him for 30 seconds from across the lot and then pulled his cruiser alongside him. "Where you headed?" Bowman had said through the open window, his thumb already on the ring. Deshaun had looked at him. "Home," he said. "What's in the bags?" "Groceries." "Mind if I take a look?" "I'd rather you didn't." Deshaun's voice was careful, and even the voice of a man who has had this conversation before and knows every version of where it can go. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Didn't say you did," Bowman said, and the smile he offered with it was the smile of a man who enjoys the particular power of a question that doesn't need to be a question. "Just asking." He had kept Deshaun on that sidewalk for 22 minutes, asking questions, running his plates 3 times, requesting his ID, twice calling in a check on his name that came back clean, and when it came back clean, calling it in again, as though the first result might have been wrong. Deshaun had stood there with 2 bags of groceries getting heavier in his hands and said nothing because he understood that saying anything would become the thing Bowman wrote down. When Bowman finally drove away, no arrest, no ticket, no official record that the stop had occurred at all. Deshaun had stood on the sidewalk for a long moment before walking to his truck. That was how Bowman worked, not always with cuffs and charges. Sometimes just with time and proximity and the message that someone was watching and could make things difficult whenever they chose. In 5 years, 7 formal complaints had been filed against him. 6 involved black male subjects. 1 involved a black woman. Not one had been sustained. 5 of the 7 had been assigned to the same internal affairs investigator, a man named Roy Casper, who had been eating lunch with Bowman every other Wednesday for 8 years. And who knew Bowman's coffee order without needing to ask. On the night he rolled into Lot D, Bowman was restless in the way of a man who has been doing something unchallenged for so long that the doing of it has stopped feeling like anything at all. And restlessness in a man like that looks for a target, the way water looks for the lowest ground. He saw Marcus Caldwell standing in Space 22, and his thumb found the ring. He already knew how this was going to go. What Travis Bowman saw when he looked at Marcus Caldwell was a target. What was actually standing in Space 22 of Lot D was something considerably more complicated, though nothing about Marcus's appearance would have given that away, which was in fact precisely the point. Marcus was 43 years old, lean and composed with a stillness about him that was different from the stillness of a man who has nothing going on, It was the stillness of a man who has a great deal going on and has learned through years of discipline to keep none of it visible on the surface. He wore a dark jacket over a charcoal dress shirt, slacks with a crease that had survived the full day, and shoes that were clean without being conspicuous. He looked like what his cover said. He was a mid-level financial compliance consultant, the kind of man who traveled for work and rented furnished apartments and kept largely to himself, unremarkable in the specific studied way that people who cannot afford to be remarkable arrange their appearance. He had arrived in Lot D at 8:29 p.m., pulling into Space 22 with the calm deliberateness of someone who had chosen the spot in advance. Before he got out of the car, he sat for 2 minutes with the engine off, and in those 2 minutes he did what he always did. Before stepping into a space he was not certain about, he looked at every fixed point that might matter later. The camera mounted on column K7 angled slightly downward to cover the lane. The loitering notice on the column to his left, Florida Statute Section 810.09 business hours, ending at 9 p.m., his own dashboard clock. The patrol car he had noted at the lot entrance on the way in, unit number faintly legible on the door panel. He opened the glove compartment, took out a small blue notebook, the kind sold in office supply stores for $2.49, the kind that no one looks at. Twice wrote 3 lines, closed it, and put it back. Then he got out of the car and stood beside it, hands loose, and waited. Marcus had been living in Harland County for 14 months by then in a third-floor apartment on Weston Drive with a superintendent named Dale who fixed plumbing immediately and everything else when he got around to it. He had told his neighbor Irene, who had knocked to borrow sugar within 48 hours of his arrival, and knocked every few weeks since that he worked in financial compliance consulting. Irene had accepted this with a nod and a vague, "That must keep you busy." And it did. The blue notebook on his kitchen table held 61 pages. Not journals, not diaries, but operational records. Meticulous, cross-referenced each entry, written in the same small, precise hand. The kind of documentation that exists not to remember the past, but to make the past provable. Each notebook had a case authorization code written in pencil on the inside back cover. He was there that night because an informant had agreed to a meeting. The informant was late, and Marcus was comfortable with waiting in the way that people become comfortable with it, when waiting has been a professional requirement for long enough that it stops feeling like wasted time and starts feeling like a different kind of work. At 8:41 p.m., the informant's phone had gone silent and Travis Bowman's patrol car had rolled into the lot instead. Marcus heard the engine change its rhythm as the cruiser slowed. He did not look up immediately. He heard the vehicle stop behind his car rather than beside it, and he registered the positioning the way a person registers a step on a stair, not with alarm exactly, but with the focused attention of someone who understands that a thing has just become relevant. He looked up. He noted badge number 338 on the uniform shirt, unit number 22 on the car door, dashboard clock showing 8:41 through the windshield. The details went into the same mental file where everything went dated, sequenced, cross-referenced against everything he already knew. Travis Bowman climbed out of his cruiser, rolled his wedding ring once with his thumb, and walked toward him with the loose, proprietary stride of a man who has spent 19 years treating this county like something he personally owned. Marcus looked at him with the patient, evaluating calm of someone who has faced far more than a restless cop on a Tuesday night and waited for whatever came next. Whatever came next was going to be documented. The night air in Lot D was warm and flat. The kind of evening stillness that settles over Florida parking lots in early fall when the concrete still holds enough of the day's warmth that you can feel it rising through the soles of your shoes and above the dying flicker of the sodium lamp. A moth was circling the light, with the patient, spiraling dedication of something that has no other plan for the evening. Bowman stopped 6 feet from Marcus, looked him up and down. Once a slow, deliberate assessment that was not gathering information so much as delivering a message about who was doing the looking and who was being looked at. And then he said, without preamble, without warmth, without any of the language that is supposed to come first. "What are you doing out here?" Marcus met his eyes and held them without dropping them and without any aggression. The way you hold a door open steadily without effort and without the faintest suggestion of stepping back. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" Bowman's thumb found the ring and began its rotation. "Yeah, there's a problem. You've been standing here for 20 minutes on private property after posted hours." He said it with the flat, practiced authority of a man who has said a version of this sentence hundreds of times and has worn it smooth from use. "That's a problem." "I've been here 11 minutes, Marcus said, "and business hours end at 9. It's 8:41. Bowman's jaw tightened. He was not used to being corrected with specific numbers by a man he had stopped, and the precision of it, the instant calm recall of the detail moved across his face before he smoothed it back into authority. "You keeping time out here? What are you, a lawyer?" "No, just someone who reads the posted notice." Marcus's voice stayed level. "May I ask what this stop is based on?" "Don't give me that." The words came out practiced smooth from use. "You're standing alone in a parking lot at night. That's what it's based on." He paused, and then, "ID." There was a pause. Not hesitation, but calculation. "My hands are going to my right jacket pocket," Marcus said with the calm specificity of a statement that has been made before in other places. Slowly, Bowman watched the hand looking for the flinch or the quick weight shift he could write into a report as a threatening movement, and he was not finding it, which made him watch harder. The ID came out Florida issue address on Weston Drive photograph, matching the face in front of him. Bowman took it, looked at it for 4 seconds, handed it back without a word, and said, "Turn around, hands on the roof." "On what basis?" "Suspicious behavior." A pause, and then Bowman leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice to the register he reserved for moments when he wanted to make sure the message landed without ending up in any report. "Because I said so, son. That's what basis." His thumb rolled the ring in a long, steady circle. "And because I've been doing this for 19 years, and I know what I see when I see it. Now turn around before this gets a lot worse for you." The slur he added after it was barely above a whisper, the casual, contemptuous kind, not shouted, not heated, but dropped like a coin someone doesn't think twice about spending because he had spent that coin so many times in so many parking lots that it had lost whatever weight it might once have carried for him. For Marcus, it landed differently. It always did. But Marcus turned around and placed his hands on the roof of his car because he understood with the bone-deep understanding of a man trained for exactly these moments that what happened next mattered far more than what had just been said. The metal of the car roof was warm from the day's heat not yet cooled rough under his palms. He heard Bowman step forward. He felt the handcuffs before he heard them, the cold contact of the metal on his right wrist. Then his left, clicking tight without warning, without any statement that he was being detained, or why the ratchet sound moving through the quiet night air and bouncing faintly off the concrete pillar. And then into the stillness of Lot D in a calm, clear voice that was something entirely other than panic, Marcus spoke. "I'd like to note for the record that it is 8:43 p.m. I am being placed in handcuffs at Harlan Square Mall, Lot D near column K7. The officer's badge number is 338. Bowman went still for exactly 1 beat, not afraid, not guilty. Confused, the confusion of a man who has put handcuffs on hundreds of people and knows exactly what they do, and this was not it. The people he cuffed cursed or pleaded or went limp or silent. They did not recite location coordinates and badge numbers in a level, unhurried voice, as though they were filling out a form they had already memorized. "Get in the car," Bowman said. Marcus got in without argument, without resistance, settling back against the rear seat with the deliberate composure of a man who has just made a decision about how the next several months of his life are going to go. He looked at the headrest in front of him and closed his eyes for 3 full seconds. Not in fear, not in defeat, but with the focused inward attention of a man who is locking a time stamp into a mental record that is going to outlast this parking lot, this cruiser, and Travis Bowman's 19 years of certainty. Bowman keyed his radio at 8:44 p.m., and the transmission was captured automatically by the department's dispatch server and archived with a timestamp that would never go away. Unit 22 to dispatch, got one in custody, loitering, suspicious, bringing him in. A brief pause. Copy that 22. Any charges? Another pause shorter. And then in Bowman's voice, unhurried and completely without self-consciousness, the voice of a man who does not know he is saying the 6 words that will define the next 3 years of his life. Not yet. Let me see what he's got. The cruiser pulled out of Lot D and onto the main road. Behind it, the parking lot went quiet. The sodium lamp kept its slow, flickering countdown. The camera on column K7 kept recording because that is what cameras do, whether or not anyone has told them something important just happened. The 5th District substation sat on the corner of Meridian and Caldwell, a squat institutional building that smelled inside of floor wax and burned coffee, and the particular exhaustion of a space that never fully empties and never fully rests. And Marcus Caldwell arrived there in the back of Bowman's cruiser at 9:02 p.m., with the calm expression of a man who has been in worse places and knew exactly what to do while he was in them. Booking was mechanical, photographed under fluorescent lights, fingerprinted personal effects logged into a clear plastic bag by a desk officer who did not make eye contact. 1 wallet, 1 set of keys, 1 phone, 1 pack of rubber bands. No notebook, it was in the glove compartment of his sedan sitting unattended in space 22 of Lot D. He was placed in interview room B, a small room with a metal table bolted to the floor, 2 plastic chairs, a single overhead light, and a door that clicked with the finality of a space designed to make people feel the weight of institutional authority. Marcus sat in the chair facing the door. He folded his hands on the table surface and waited. He was good at waiting. He had been doing it his entire adult life in one form or another. Bowman came in at 9:19 p.m., alone, no second officer, no recording device running, or so he believed. The room-level audio system installed as part of a department infrastructure update 6 weeks prior had been activated automatically when the room was assigned and the door closed. The memo about the upgrade had gone to every officer in the division. Bowman had received it and deleted it without reading past the subject line. The room audio was running. Bowman pulled out the chair across from Marcus, turned it around, and straddled it backwards in the way that men who want to appear in control of small rooms sit. He leaned his forearms on the back of the chair and looked at Marcus the way he looked at everyone he'd ever put in that chair, like a man holding a hand he's certain is better than whatever the other person has. "Let's make this easy," Bowman said. "You tell me what you were doing in that lot, I write it down, we both go home. Simple. I'd like to speak with an attorney before answering any questions." Bowman nodded slowly, as though this was a response he had expected and had already decided didn't change anything. "That's fine. That's your right. But I'll tell you what happens when people lawyer up on a nothing loitering stop. It makes me wonder what they're trying to hide. Makes me look harder." He tapped his finger on the back of the chair. "Is that what you want? Me looking harder?" "I'd like to speak with an attorney," Marcus said again, in exactly the same voice at exactly the same pace, with exactly the same stillness. Bowman tried 3 more variations over the next 6 minutes. Different angles, different tones, once leaning forward so that his face was 18 inches from Marcus's face, and the full physical weight of his size and authority was pressing on the small room. Marcus maintained the same posture he had walked in with, straight-backed hands folded, eyes level, returning each version of the question with the same answer in the same voice, without variation, without agitation, without any of the cracks that Bowman was accustomed to finding in people when he applied the right pressure. There were no cracks. Bowman was pressing on solid ground and finding no give at all, and after 6 minutes of it he stood up and left, telling the duty officer that the subject was being uncooperative, which was the word he used for anyone who exercised their rights in ways that inconvenienced him. The room audio recorded all of it. At 11:15 p.m., after an internal consultation Marcus was not part of, he was released. No charges filed. The incident report Bowman filed at 11:48 p.m. read in its relevant section: Subject detained for suspicious loitering lot. D. Harlan Square Mall, 8:41 p.m. Subject released after verification. No charges warranted at this time. It did not mention the 20-minute fabrication. It did not mention the attorney request. It did not articulate what probable cause existed. It said suspicious loitering, and those two words were the entire legal foundation standing in for the chain of logic that was supposed to precede any lawful detention of any American citizen anywhere. Marcus read the report the next morning at his kitchen table obtained under Florida's Public Records Act, submitted in writing within an hour of waking. He read it once, underlined suspicious loitering with a pencil slowly, deliberately, and then turned to a fresh page in a new blue notebook and began to write. He wrote the time, the date, the location, the badge number, the unit number, the exact phrasing of the radio transmission, as he had heard it through the partition in the back of the cruiser. He wrote 4 specific procedural failures, numbered and formatted with statute citations and the relevant SOP section, page 19, of a 42-page document he had read in full the previous night. He was not angry. He had been in situations that warranted anger, and this was not that kind of situation. This was the kind of situation that warranted something more durable than anger. He was building something. Outside, the morning light came through the window at a low, flat angle, and the city went about its business, and Marcus wrote until the notebook page was full, and the coffee had gone cold, and everything that needed to be recorded had been recorded. Then he turned to a second page and kept going. Linda Foyle had been the Director of Public Affairs for the Harlan County Police Department for 6 years, and in 6 years she had developed a skill that she thought of privately as narrative management. The ability to take a situation that was genuinely bad and write about it in a way that made it sound like a situation that was merely inconvenient, and to do this without lying, which was the truly impressive part because lying creates documents that can be disproved, and Linda Foyle did not create things that could be disproved. The statement she issued before 9 a.m. the morning after Marcus's detention was a masterwork of the form. The Harlan County Police Department responded to reports of suspicious activity at the Harlan Square Mall retail complex last evening. Every word technically defensible. Bowman had logged the stop as officer initiated based on observed suspicious behavior, which was a report of a kind if you were willing to stretch the word far enough. A male individual was briefly detained for questioning and released without incident. Brief was relative. Without incident meant no documented injury, which was accurate. The department thanks the community for their continued partnership in maintaining safe commercial areas. This sentence meant nothing specific, which was its function. By 9:14 a.m., the Harlan Courier had run 3 paragraphs under the headline, "Man detained at Harlan Square Mall identified as area resident." Claire Odom read the statement at her desk with the focused attention of a person who has spent 4 years learning what carefully chosen words are hiding. She was 38, the Courier's senior investigative reporter, and she had filed 41 FOIA requests in 4 years, which meant she had spent 4 years learning the specific grammar of institutional self-protection. She knew what responded to reports sounded like when there had been no reports. She knew what briefly detained covered when you let it. She drove to Weston Drive that afternoon and knocked on the door of the 3rd-floor apartment. Marcus opened it. She recognized him from the Gazette description. He recognized her from her photograph in the paper. "Someone fed a story about you," she said without the softening preamble people usually perform. "I'm not printing anything, but I want you to know it's circulating. The angle is unusual pattern of movements. Frequent visitor to commercial properties. Purpose unclear." Marcus was quiet for a moment. His face did not change in the way that people's faces change when they hear things are being said about them. "Miss Odom," he said, "how far back does the Courier's County FOIA archive go?" She stared at him. 12 years online, longer in archive. He wrote it down. He already had a notebook in his hand. She left him her card and went back to her car and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine because she had covered this county for 4 years and filed 41 FOIA requests and interviewed hundreds of people who had been on the receiving end of the department's attention, and not one of them, not a single one, had responded to a planted story about themselves by immediately asking about public records infrastructure. She started the engine. She had something to look into. Roy Casper had been with the Harland County Police Department for 21 years, 12 on Patrol 9 in Internal Affairs, and in 9 years in IIA he had developed a particular and well-practiced relationship with the word thorough, using it frequently in his investigation logs and applying it rarely in his actual investigations, which was less a contradiction than it might appear, because in Casper's understanding of his job, thorough did not describe the depth of an inquiry, but the completeness of the documentation, explaining why no deeper inquiry was necessary. He was 55, heavyset, with the permanently tired look of a man who has been managing other people's problems long enough to stop being surprised by any of them. He always had a toothpick in the corner of his mouth, had for years, the way some people always have a pen behind their ear, a small habitual prop that had become part of how he occupied space in a room. He rolled it from side to side when he was thinking. It went perfectly still when he was worried, which happened rarely enough that people who knew him noticed it when it did. His relationship with Bowman had been built over 8 years of Wednesday lunches, a companionship that neither man ever called friendship, but that functioned like friendship in the one way that mattered most. Inside an institution, each knew what the other needed and provided it without requiring the exchange to be named. Bowman needed complaints to disappear. Casper needed the paperwork to stay clean. It had worked because Casper was careful and because the complaint process was structured in ways that made it easy to be careful. When the Caldwell complaint landed on his desk, 8 pages, typed, numbered footnotes, 4 procedural failure citations with statute references. His expression did not change. He read it, noted the SOP citation, noted that the complainant had pulled the incident report within 12 hours of release, noted the specific mention of page 19 of the department's publicly posted operating procedures. The toothpick moved left to right. He pulled up the incident report. He noted the timeline discrepancy, 20 minutes claimed, versus what the camera would show. He logged Zone D camera coverage reviewed. Coverage quality insufficient for incident reconstruction. No request submitted to property management. He had consulted a mapping document 3 years out of date that did not account for a system upgrade the mall had installed 18 months prior, and he had used it to conclude that no usable footage existed and entered that conclusion into his log as verified fact, rather than unexamined assumption. Not technically a lie, a conclusion stated with the confidence of a finding while being, in substance, a refusal to look. He had done it so many times it no longer felt like anything in particular. That same afternoon, Marcus walked into the Harland Square Mall management office and asked to speak with the property manager. Frank Tillman was a careful man. Years of slip and falls and parking lot disputes had given him a finely calibrated sense for when something was going to become a problem, and the quiet man in the dark jacket standing in his office doorway had that particular quality of stillness that careful people learn to take seriously. "I need to request preservation of camera footage from Lot D," Marcus said. "The period from 8:20 to 9 p.m. on September 19th. I understand your system may record over previous footage on a rolling basis. I need it held." Tillman looked at him. "You involved in an incident. I was detained in your parking facility by a Harland County officer that evening. I have a formal complaint filed with the department's internal affairs. I'm requesting the footage as potential evidence." Tillman pulled up the system log, found the file, and flagged it for retention. "It'll stay," he said. "Anything else?" "I'd appreciate written confirmation of the preservation request and the timestamp of this conversation." Tillman looked at him again, the same look, slightly different quality, the look of a man recalibrating his assessment of something. He printed a 1-page letter on Harland Square Mall letterhead, signed it, noted the date and time 3:47 p.m., and handed it across the desk. Marcus put it in a folder alongside the incident report with its pencil underlines and the public records request confirmation, and walked out into the afternoon. That folder, which now contained 3 documents with timestamps that told a very specific story, would grow over the following weeks into something that Roy Casper would eventually have a great deal of cause to think about, though he did not know that yet. He was at his desk rolling his toothpick, fairly certain this was going to go the way it always went. 2 weeks after the night in Lot D, Travis Bowman had arrived at a comfortable conclusion about his situation, which was that he did not have a situation. The complaint had been filed. Casper was handling it, and 14 days of silence from IIA meant exactly what 14 days of silence had meant. Every other time a complainant had filed against him, it was going away. He told himself this with the confident ease of a man whose confidence has been validated so many times it no longer requires testing. On a Thursday evening after a shift that had gone the way he liked, he was in the locker room of the 5th District substation with 2 younger officers, a second-year named Greer and a rookie named Sean Prater, who was still in the phase of his career where he was trying to figure out which version of policing he was being asked to perform. Bowman sat on the bench with one boot off and his elbows on his knees doing what he did after good shifts holding court. "You know what I hate more than a guy who runs," Bowman was saying, turning his ring on his finger in the absent, rolling way that Prater had already learned to associate with moments when Bowman was settling in for a while. "A guy who files, because a guy who runs, at least he's being honest about what he is. A guy who files thinks the paperwork is the power." He paused and looked at Prater directly because Prater was still young enough to be instructed. "It isn't. You know what the power is?" Prater shook his head. "Who's reading the paperwork?" Bowman tapped the ring against the locker door, a small metallic emphasis. "Roy Casper has been reading paperwork in this division since before you graduated high school, and nothing sticks to me that Casper reads. You understand what I'm telling you?" "Yes, sir," Prater said, though his voice had the careful quality of a man who was listening to something he was not entirely sure how to feel about. "This guy tonight in Lot D," Bowman continued, settling deeper into the story, his thumb rolling in its steady rotation. "He thought he was smart, knew his statute numbers, recited my badge number like a little robot." He smiled at this. "You know what that tells me? Guy who knows his rights is a guy who's had dealings before, had to know them for a reason." He tapped his temple. "Pattern recognition. 19 years of it." Greer nodded. Prater looked at his boots, which was where Prater's eyes tended to go when something in a conversation was making him uncomfortable in a way he didn't have the standing yet to say out loud. "He'll fold," Bowman said, lacing his boot back up. "They always fold, because at the end of the day it's his word against mine, and my word has 19 years of institutional weight behind it. That's not arrogance. That's just arithmetic." He stood up and adjusted his belt, the ring catching the fluorescent light. "Casper buries it in a month. Watch." What Bowman did not know as he walked out of the locker room and down the fluorescent corridor, with the unhurried confidence of a man whose arithmetic has always come out right, was that 9 hours before his casual dismissal of the complaint, the man he had dismissed had been sitting across a desk from Frank Tillman with a signed preservation letter for the Lot D camera footage. That the footage showed 11 minutes, not 20. That the footage was now flagged, locked, and in the possession of someone who knew exactly what to do with it. And what none of the officers in that locker room knew, not Bowman, not Greer, not Prater with his eyes on his boots, was that 3 miles away on Weston Drive in a 3rd-floor apartment, Marcus Caldwell was at his kitchen table in the quiet of the evening, adding a new entry to his notebook. The entry read in part pattern of prior complaints. 7 filed 0, sustained 5, assigned to same investigator. Investigator has not contacted property management. Footage confirmed intact at 3:47 p.m. today. Investigator's log closes footage question at 10:34 a.m., 9 hours before confirmation of footage. No contact documented. He underlined the last sentence twice, slowly. Then he turned to the next page. Bowman was right about one thing. It was arithmetic. He had just miscounted. Tuesday evening, Weston Drive. The gold-flat light of early fall was going sideways through the trees, and Marcus came out of his building with a dry cleaning bag over his left shoulder and a paper bag of groceries in his right hand, thinking about a note he needed to add to the notebook before the specific phrasing of something faded. He saw Bowman's car before he had taken 4 steps. It was parked across the street, Bowman's personal vehicle. Not a patrol car, which Marcus noted immediately, because it meant this was not an official visit, which meant it was meant to function in the space that official visits can't reach, the space where pressure lives without a paper trail. He adjusted nothing about his pace. Bowman got out first, crossing the street with the easy, proprietary walk of a man who moves through his county like he owns it. Beside him, Sean Prater came around the front of the vehicle and positioned himself near the hood, closer to the street than to the sidewalk. But the geometry of 3 people on a residential sidewalk at dusk speaks its own language, and everyone present understood what language that was. "Evening, Mr. Caldwell," Bowman said with the warm, concerned tone of a man doing a welfare check. His thumb was on the ring already. "Just checking in, making sure everything's okay." "Everything's fine," Marcus said. "Thank you. Lot of paperwork filing a complaint," Bowman observed in the mild, conversational tone of someone noting that it looked like rain. "For everyone involved. Takes time, energy." A pause. "Sometimes it's not worth it depending on what you're trying to accomplish." Marcus looked at him. He said nothing. Prater tried next, a little too eager. "You planning on staying in Harlan long?" Marcus looked at Prater, then back at Bowman. "I'm not sure what my plans have to do with an official visit." "It's not official," Bowman said, and the way he said it made clear that the unofficial nature of it was the point. "This is just neighbors talking." He took 1 step forward, deliberate, weighted, the kind of step that is technically nothing, and practically a statement about who occupies space and who is permitted to. He was 6'2" and 230 pounds, and he had spent 19 years learning how the physics of proximity worked on the human nervous system. He had used it in 100 conversations in 100 places, and it had never not worked. Marcus did not move. He stood on the sidewalk with a grocery bag in one hand and held Bowman's eyes the way you hold a door open, without effort, without drama, without the faintest suggestion of stepping back, and without any of the cracks or flinches or weight shifts that Bowman was accustomed to producing with that particular step. He looked at Bowman with the patient, evaluating calm of a man who has sat across tables from people far more dangerous than a frustrated cop on a residential street, and he simply held the space he was standing in. 3 seconds passed. Bowman was close enough that Marcus could see the ring moving on his finger, the slow, steady rotation of 19 years of habit. "Suit yourself," Bowman said finally, and the words came out flatter than he intended. They got back in the car. Marcus watched them drive away until the taillights disappeared around the corner, then set the grocery bag on the roof beside the dry cleaning bag, took out his phone and dialed a number he did not need to look up. It connected on the second ring. "Contact was made," he said. "No incident. I'm documenting." 3 seconds of silence on the other end measured unhurried the silence of someone processing. Then a woman's voice, even and calm, understood. "Continue protocol." 51 seconds. The call ended. Marcus picked up both bags and went inside. Before he started dinner, he opened the notebook to a new entry and wrote the time of the visit. Bowman's personal vehicle plate number, Prater's name as he had caught it on the uniform badge in the fading light, and a 3-line assessment intimidation attempt. Unofficial. Designed to suggest continued monitoring without creating a record. Classic secondary pressure. No escalation. Then below it a shorter line. He still thinks this is going his way. He closed the notebook and made dinner. Across the city in his personal vehicle, idling 2 blocks away from Weston Drive, Bowman told Prater, "He'll fold. They always fold." The ring moved in its steady rotation against his finger, and Bowman believed every word completely the way a man believes things that have always been true for him without ever examining why. Claire Odom submitted her FOIA bundle to the Harland County Records Office on a Thursday morning, 12 items covering 3 years internal communications between IIA and Public Affairs Officer complaint data by demographic category and all correspondence referencing Lot D of Harland Square Mall. She told no one. She had been doing this work long enough to know that the moment a records request becomes known inside the department, it is targeting the documents. It would have found develop a remarkable tendency to become unavailable through mechanisms that are each individually defensible and collectively effective. She waited 18 days. The response arrived on a Friday, 31 pages, several blacked out in whole or part others, routine meeting agendas, parking maintenance schedules, an email thread about body camera battery contracts. She read them in order at her kitchen table. Page 17 stopped her cold. An email chain. 2 messages. The bottom one, the original, dated 9 days before the night Bowman arrested Marcus in Lot D. Sender R. Casper, I. A Division, Harland County. PD. Recipient, L. Foyle, Director of Public Affairs. Harland County. PD. Subject line RE Lot D / North Entrance / Scheduled Review. The body, all 3 paragraphs, was blacked out completely. The attachment listed at the bottom, labeled NL-D Survey Week 39, was noted as absent from the county system. The top message, Foyle's reply, was also blacked out except for one visible line above the signature, "Confirmed. Will coordinate accordingly. LF." Claire read it 4 times without moving. NII. A detective had emailed the head of public affairs about Lot D specifically 9 days before a man was arrested in Lot D. The attachment explaining what the email was about had been removed from the system. The body of both messages was redacted, and the only visible line said "confirmed" and "coordinate accordingly." She printed the page, put it in a manila folder, locked it in a drawer at home, not the office. She called Marcus the next morning. He picked up on the second ring. She told him what she found. He was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Not surprised, she realized, but the pause of a man who has been expecting a piece of information and is noting its arrival. "Have you preserved the original digital file with the metadata intact?" he asked. "Yes." "Good. The metadata will show the timestamp of the redactions. If they were made after your request was filed, that's a separate issue worth pursuing." A pause. "Miss Odom, I'd suggest you treat that page the way you're already treating it, carefully, and not where anyone connected to the department can see it." She asked him what he thought the email meant. He was quiet again, and then he said with the same precise, unhurried voice he used for everything, "I think it means exactly what it looks like it means. And I think the 3 most important words in it are the ones from Director Foyle. Confirmed. Will coordinate." "Yes," he said. "That's a person who knew something was going to happen in that lot and agreed to manage the narrative around it afterward." He paused. "That's worth reporting very carefully." After she hung up, Claire sat at her kitchen table for a long time, the printed page in front of her. She had covered this county for 4 years and filed 41 FOIA requests. She had uncovered mismanaged budgets, a zoning scandal, a school board procurement scheme. She had never had a page make her feel the way this one did, not excited, not triumphant, but cold and purposeful. The particular clarity of a journalist who has just put her hand on the edge of something large and is deciding how carefully to proceed. The Lot D camera, the email, the attachment that no longer existed, the dates that aligned too precisely for coincidence. She was standing at the edge of something. She folded the page, put it back in the folder, and went to make coffee because what came next was going to require more patience than adrenaline, and she had plenty of both. Karen Hollis ran her weekly system audit on Tuesdays because she had made the mistake of scheduling it on Thursdays twice during a week with a federal holiday, and both times it had been skipped, and she had learned from that experience with the resigned efficiency of someone who has spent 4 years maintaining institutional systems and adapting her practices around the institutional tendency toward inconsistency. She was 36, methodical and quiet. In the way that people who work with servers become methodical and quiet, her job was to live in the gap between what the technology was designed to do and what the people operating it actually understood about it. And in that gap, she had learned that most of the interesting problems lived waiting for someone who was paying attention. On the Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Marcus's arrest, she was reviewing upload logs from the body camera fleet as part of a standard audit. The new sync system installed 8 weeks prior as part of an infrastructure upgrade had an automatic upload function when a patrol vehicle returned to the lot, and the officer's device synced with the car dock footage uploaded automatically to the server and archived in a queue pending case tagging by the officer. Untagged files sat in an overflow partition indexed by date. They were not deleted. They were not visible in the active case management interface. They waited quietly in the place where things go when no one has yet decided what to do with them. She found the file in the September overflow partition at 10:22 a.m., device ID BWC-338, assigned Officer T. Bowman, Unit 22, upload timestamp 10:51 p.m. on the night of the arrest, duration 21 minutes 44 seconds, case tag none. She double-checked the assignment log. BWC-338 was Bowman's camera. His incident report had been filed at 11:48 p.m. The upload had occurred at 10:51 p.m., nearly an hour before the report was written. The incident report stated the camera had experienced a sync failure that evening. The upload log showed no sync failure, no error code, no interruption of any kind. It showed a successful upload at 10:51 p.m. and a clean archive timestamp. There was a 21-minute recording of Lot D from Bowman's own body camera that had been sitting in an overflow partition for 3 weeks because no one had gone looking for it. Karen made a copy to a secure drive immediately the way she always did when she found something that felt like it mattered because she had been here long enough to know that things which feel like they matter sometimes stop existing before the right people are told about them. Then she logged her discovery in the system maintenance record, automatic time-stamped visible to anyone with access to the audit trail, and forwarded the log entry to her supervisor with a flag. Untagged BWC footage from September Lot D stop. May require IA review. The flag moved upward through the chain in the slow, redistributive way of institutional information supervisor to records manager to the deputy chief's administrative assistant. 6 days passed before it reached anyone who understood what it contained. But the file itself had never moved. It was logged, time-stamped, copied, and sitting exactly where Karen had found it. The system had done what it was designed to do, even when the people inside it were not. The audio from BWC 338 during the section that would matter most ran like this. Bowman's voice in the outdoor acoustic of a parking lot. "You've been standing here for 20 minutes. Marcus level and clear. May I ask the basis for this stop? Bowman. Don't give me that. You're standing alone in a parking lot at night. A pause. Footsteps on asphalt. Then Marcus, with the deliberate calm of a man creating a record in real time. My hands are going to my right jacket pocket. Slowly. The sound of fabric. A brief silence. Then clear and precise. I'd like to note for the record that it is 8:43 p.m. I am being placed in handcuffs at Harlan Square Mall Lot D near column K7. The officer's badge number is 338. Bowman. Get in the car. Then, 1 minute and 20 seconds after the sound of handcuffs, the radio transmission in Bowman's voice unhurried and completely without self-consciousness. Not yet, let me see what he's got. Not I have reason to believe. Not there is evidence of, not probable cause has been established by. The stop came first. The justification was going to be assembled afterward from whatever turned up at the station. That was the sequence. The audio made it concrete, permanent, and impossible to argue away. The body camera file reached II. A Lieutenant Gerald Moss. Roy Casper's direct supervisor on day 38 forwarded with a routing note describing it as potentially case-adjacent material requiring review. It sat in Moss's inbox until Monday morning when he listened to 90 seconds of it and picked up his phone. He called Brenda Shore, the department's legal officer. "We have a problem," he said. Shore was the kind of lawyer who preferred precision to comfort, and she articulated the problem precisely. The audio, the dispatch log, and the incident report taken together created a sequence that did not support the characterization of the stop as grounded in reasonable suspicion. The radio transmission appeared a minute and 20 seconds after the cuffing was audible. The incident report stated suspicious loitering without articulating a single specific fact that would qualify under the Terry standard. The timeline discrepancy 20 minutes claimed 11 documented was now verifiable with 2 independent sources. Moss convened a meeting himself. Shore Casper and Deputy Commissioner Warren Pruitt. Pruitt used the phrase at this stage 4 times in 12 minutes, which was the language of a man who had learned that most institutional problems resolve themselves if given enough time and enough silence, and who was hoping this one would do the same. Casper sat through the meeting with his toothpick perfectly still in the corner of his mouth. Shore noticed. She wrote nothing down about it, but she filed it. The outcome proceed with the formal A hearing with the body cam file, now officially in the IIA record. It could no longer disappear. But what Casper had and had not done in his investigation over the preceding 5 weeks was also now in the record, and that was going to be a problem of a different kind. What Casper had and had not done was by that point documented with considerable specificity in a blue notebook on a kitchen table on Weston Drive, which had now reached 44 entries. Marcus had pulled Bowman's complaint history from the department's Sunshine Law database. 7 complaints, 6 involving black male subjects, 1 involving a black woman, 0 sustained, 5 assigned to Casper. He had noted that Casper's investigation log closed the mall footage question at 10:34 a.m. on the morning after the arrest, while the preservation letter from Frank Tillman confirming the footage was intact and accessible had been signed at 3:47 p.m. the same day. 9 hours after Casper declared the footage unavailable, the footage had been confirmed to exist by Marcus himself in a 9-minute conversation that Casper had never bothered to have. He had the email from page 17. He had the incident report. He had the preservation letter, the complaint history, the dispatch logs, and now the formal a hearing notice that had arrived that morning. He read the notice once, set it on the table, and typed 4 words to a number he knew by heart. Hearing scheduled. Week 6. The reply came in 40 seconds. Confirmed. I'll be there. He put the phone away and looked at the folder on the table. Each document a stone in a wall that had been built carefully in sequence over 6 weeks, because Marcus had understood from the moment Bowman's cruiser swung into Lot D that in a room full of people who controlled the official records, the only record that mattered was the one they could not reach. He had built one, and in 9 days it was going to be in front of a panel. Douglas Mercer had been the lead attorney for the Harlan County Police Officers Association for 11 years, and in 11 years, he had developed a comprehensive working knowledge of the varieties of complaint he was likely to encounter. Angry complainants were the easiest anger, made people imprecise, and imprecision made complaints containable. Frightened ones were the saddest, but often most manageable. Opportunistic ones were negotiated. And then there was the 4th kind, rare enough that Mercer did not have a standard playbook for it, the precise ones. He met Marcus in a beige conference room at the county's Community Dispute Office 5 days after the complaint was filed. Water pitcher on the table. Neither man touched it. Mercer led with the standard questions, the organized professional approach that had resolved 6 of Bowman's 7 previous complaints before they became difficult. Was Marcus asked to leave the premises number vehicle legally parked? Yes, space 22 Lot D. 2-hour free parking until 9 p.m. present from 8:29 to 8:41 by camera record. Mercer wrote something. You seem very certain of the times." "I noted them." Mercer shifted. "Did Marcus make any statement or gesture the officer could reasonably have interpreted as threatening or non-compliant?" "I asked the basis for the stop," Marcus said. "I announced my hand movement before reaching for my ID. I stated the time and location after being cuffed, and I requested an attorney before answering questions in the detention room." Mercer looked at his legal pad, made a mark that was not a word. "Where did you find the procedural citations in your complaint document?" "I read the relevant statutes and the department's SOP, which is publicly posted." "You read the SOP? The section I cited is on page 19. Mercer's pen stopped. He looked at Marcus across the untouched water pitcher and the two untouched glasses, and did the thing his 11 years of experience told him to do when he encountered something he didn't have a ready framework for. He went completely still and simply observed. He had interviewed hundreds of complainants. Most were angry or frightened or calculating. The man across from him was none of those things. He was composed without being cold, precise without being robotic, and he answered every question with exactly the information the question required. No more, no less, with the specific minimum necessary economy of someone who has been trained to treat every exchange as a document in progress. Mercer closed his legal pad. They shook hands. He left first. In the elevator on the way down, he typed a note into his phone, not about the complaint, not about the SOP or the Terry Standard, but a single word he had learned over 11 years to treat as a professional warning. Careful. He did not yet know what he was being careful about. He knew only that whatever was in that folder Marcus had carried into the room, it was going to require a different quality of attention than anything he had brought to the previous 6 Bowman complaints. And something in the measured, patient quality of the man across from him, the way he waited before answering, the way he chose each word, the way a careful man chooses his footing on unfamiliar ground, told Mercer that patience was the only currency this situation was going to accept. He put his phone away, walked out of the building into the afternoon sunlight, and immediately called his assistant to block out the following week. The text arrived at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and Travis Bowman read it in the parking lot of a Waffle House on Route 9, with his engine running and his coffee cooling in the cup holder, and he read it 3 times before he put the phone down and stared at the windshield. They have the body cam file. It's in the IIA record now. He had believed the camera had not uploaded. He had believed this not because he had verified it, but because he had wanted to believe it, and because the old system failed frequently enough that assuming a sync failure required no particular effort, and because for 19 years he had operated on the comfortable principle that things he did not check tended to resolve in his favor. This was not a character flaw in his understanding, it was experience. It was pattern recognition. It was what 19 years of getting away with things looks like from the inside. The new system did not fail the way the old one did. He knew this the way he knew the memo about the upgrade in the abstract as a fact he had been told and not absorbed, sitting in the same mental folder as other things he had received and not read because they did not seem to require his attention. He had not asked how the new sync worked. He had not asked whether the failure mode was the same. He had assumed. Now he sat in a Waffle House parking lot at 6:47 a.m. and listened to the 6 words he had said into a radio at 8:44 p.m. on a Tuesday night, the way a stranger might hear them stripped of the context of the cruiser and the parking lot and 19 years of knowing how these things go. Not yet. Let me see what he's got. Not I observed the following. Not there was articulable cause. Not any of the language that is supposed to come before a man is put in handcuffs. The handcuffs first, the justification to be found afterward. He could hear clearly and for the first time exactly what those 6 words sounded like to someone who had not already decided who Marcus Caldwell was before getting out of the car. He called Mercer. Voicemail. He called the union rep, and that call was answered. The conversation had the shape of all such conversations urgent on Bowman's end, managed and measured on the other, the union rep organizing the information the way a person organizes a problem they have dealt with before. Here is what exists. Here is what I am worried about. Here is what I need. The rep told him to stop talking to anyone, write nothing down, and wait. He would reach out to Casper. He would find out exactly what the file contained. "And if it contains what I think it contains?" Bowman asked. A pause. "Then we manage it the way we manage it. But you cannot give anyone a reason to look harder. You understand me? Nothing. No action, no contact. Just wait." Bowman sat in the Waffle House parking lot for 6 minutes after the call ended, and then he went inside because he did not know what else to do with the next hour. He ordered eggs and toast. He ate without tasting them. Somewhere in the middle of the second cup of coffee, he looked down at his right hand wrapped around the mug and noticed, for the first time in what felt like years, the small groove worn into the skin of his right thumb. A channel in the flesh, from 19 years of rolling the ring so settled and permanent, it might have been a scar. He had never looked at it before. It had been there so long it had become invisible the way the things we do habitually stop registering as things we are doing. He pressed his left thumb into it. It was deeper than he expected. The Waffle House went about its ordinary Tuesday morning business around him. Clink of plates, sound of the grill, someone calling an order, and Travis Bowman sat at the counter with cold coffee and a groove in his thumb, and the slowly arriving understanding that the thing he had done in Lot D on a restless Tuesday night was not going to stay where he had left it. He left a $12 tip, because he always left a $12 tip, and went out to his car and sat in it for another 4 minutes and then drove away. The ring moved on his finger on the way home. He let it. The hearing room on the second floor of the Harland County Public Safety Building was exactly the kind of room designed to make everything that happened in it feel procedural and therefore manageable. Beige walls, rectangular table, 8 gray chairs, fluorescent lights humming at a frequency just below, conscious annoyance, and a single window overlooking the east parking lot that had clearly been placed there as an afterthought by someone who thought natural light was a reasonable substitute for natural air. The 3-person review panel was already seated when the parties arrived. Lieutenant Gerald Moss, who had listened to 90 seconds of the body cam audio and understood immediately what he was holding, sat at the center with the expression of a man who would rather be anywhere else and has accepted that he cannot be. Captain Denise Okafor, who commanded the 5th District and had spent the previous week reading every document in the file with the focused attention of someone watching a lawsuit form at the waterline, sat to his left. Deputy Commissioner Warren Pruitt, who had told Moss 3 weeks ago that he saw no grounds for escalation, sat to Moss's right and was reading through the procedural framework with the intense focus of a man using paperwork as a form of composure. Attorney Douglas Mercer arrived at 9:47 with his legal pad and his 2 pens settled into his seat, and looked at the door with the particular stillness of a man who has been told something is coming and does not know what form it will arrive in. Travis Bowman came in at 9:51 in his dress uniform, without the patrol belt and the patrol car and the familiar weight of a shift behind him. The uniform fit differently. The collar pressed the badge polished, but the man inside it sitting with his hands folded on the table in the effortful, deliberate way of someone managing a physical habit. His right thumb rested against his finger without moving. The ring did not roll. He was holding it still by conscious effort, which was costing him something, which meant his attention was divided. A woman in a gray blazer entered at 9:52 and took a seat at the side of the table, not at the head, not across from the panel, but adjacent in the position of someone who is there to provide information rather than argue a position. The man who came in beside her sat down and opened a document case and began organizing its contents with the unhurried efficiency of someone who has done this in many rooms and does not need to perform competence. Neither of them introduced themselves immediately. Their not introducing themselves had a quality to it, the comfortable stillness of people who know they will be asked to speak when the appropriate moment comes. Marcus Caldwell walked in at 9:58 with 1 folder. He sat down, placed the folder on the table in front of him, and looked at the panel. He did not look at Bowman. He did not look at the woman in the gray blazer. He looked at the panel the way you look at a thing you have been preparing for, not with excitement, not with anxiety, but with the settled, functional attention of someone whose preparation is complete. Moss opened the proceedings with the standard language, the complaint the parties, the process reading it with the careful neutrality of a man who is trying to give nothing away. Then Mercer presented the department's position. Reasonable judgment under conditions of uncertainty. Subject released without charges, no documented physical harm, procedural questions of a technical nature that did not rise to the level of sustained misconduct. He recommended a finding of no policy violation with a notation suggesting additional training on Miranda advisement sequencing. It was organized, professional, and sufficient. It would have been a sufficient argument in most versions of this hearing in most of the hearings that had come before it. Then Moss looked at the woman in the gray blazer. "You've indicated you have material relevant to the panel's deliberation," he said. "The panel will hear it." The woman looked at the panel. She did not open a folder. She did not consult notes. She said it the way facts are said when they have stopped needing to be argued clearly without drama, the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis that is certain. "My name is Sandra Webb," she said, and her voice had the steady, unhurried quality of someone who has given briefings in rooms like this many times and has learned that the weight of what she is saying does not require her voice to carry it. The words carry themselves. "I am the supervising agent of the FBI's Tampa Civil Rights and Public Corruption Unit. I am appearing before this panel because the subject of your proceeding is a federal operative whose cover was compromised during the incident under review." The room did not make a sound. The fluorescent lights kept their low background hum. Somewhere below in the building, a phone rang twice and was answered. The east parking lot through the window sat in its ordinary Tuesday morning stillness. And in the hearing room, the silence that followed Sandra Webb's 2 sentences had a texture that was entirely different from the silence of a pause or a transition. It was the silence of a room that has just been handed a fact that changes the shape of everything that came before it. And everyone in the room knows it, and no one has yet decided what to do with knowing it. Douglas Mercer set down his pen. Not slowly, not dramatically, he simply set it on the legal pad and did not pick it up again for the next several minutes, and the absence of the pen in his hand made him look subtly like a different person. Deputy Commissioner Pruitt looked at the authorization document that Webb's colleague had placed in front of him. FBI letterhead. A case designation, beginning with a sequence of numbers, the word Clearwater at the top, with the expression of a man who had been carrying a specific confidence about how a situation was going to resolve, and has just discovered that the confidence was based on an incomplete picture of what the situation was. Captain Okafor looked at Marcus. Marcus was looking at the panel. His expression had not changed at all. And Travis Bowman's face, the face that had looked at a man in a parking lot and made a decision in 4 seconds, underwent a change that was not dramatic in the way films make things dramatic. Not a gasp or a recoil, but something slower and more complete, the way a wall changes color when the paint underneath begins to show through. The color left him from the temples downward, a gradual visible draining that moved across his face and settled. His hands, which had been folded on the table, separated slowly, the fingers spreading, and then pressing flat against the surface as though he needed to feel the table to confirm it was still there. His right thumb moved toward the ring in the old involuntary reflex, the 19-year habit seeking its anchor, and stopped. Not held still by effort this time. Stopped the way a machine stops when the power goes out without resistance, without gradual slowing, simply stopped because what Bowman was processing in that moment had taken every available resource, and there was nothing left for habit. He looked at the word Clearwater at the top of the authorization document. He looked at Marcus Caldwell. And for the first time in the hearing, Marcus looked back at him not with triumph, not with anger, but with the same patient evaluating calm that had been there in Lot D, except now it carried the weight of 14 months of work and a folder full of documents and a federal agent sitting at the side of the table, and Bowman could feel the weight of all of it in that single brief exchange of eye contact. Then Marcus looked back at the panel, and Bowman was left looking at the side of his face. Webb explained in precise and measured language what she could tell the panel at that stage, that Marcus had been deployed in Harland County for 14 months as part of Operation Clearwater, that his presence in Lot D on the night of the arrest was a component of an active undercover operation, and that Bowman's decision to detain him had exposed his cover to at least 3 individuals within the department before that morning's hearing forced a 5-week acceleration of the operational timeline and required the deployment of additional field resources that had not been budgeted. Mercer recovered with the practiced speed of a good lawyer and argued that the panel's jurisdiction was limited to Bowman's conduct under department policy. The federal status of the complainant was a matter for separate proceedings. Webb agreed calmly that both questions were different and both mattered, and that she was not there to control the outcome. She was there to ensure complete information. Then Moss looked at Marcus, and Marcus opened his folder and worked forward through the record without standing, without theater placing each document on the table in the order it had been built: the Tillman preservation letter, the footage timeline, the body cam audio, Casper's log entry, and its 9-hour gap, the email from page 17. He placed the last document and closed the folder. Then he did the one thing he had not done in 6 weeks of documentation and patient preparation. He looked directly at Travis Bowman. Bowman looked back at him, pale and very still, his hands flat on the table and the ring on his right hand catching the fluorescent light like an accusation. "Officer Bowman," Marcus said in the same level, precise voice that had announced its hand movements in Lot D, that had requested an attorney in interview room B, that had been calm and exact in every exchange since 8:41 p.m. on a Tuesday night when a man had decided what he was before getting out of a car. "You told me in that parking lot that I had to do what you said because you said so. You told me you'd been doing this for 19 years and you knew what you saw." He paused for 1 second, not for effect, but for precision. "The record tells a different story, and unlike the things you said that night, the record doesn't change." He turned back to this panel. "I am placing every document in this folder into the proceedings record. I am not characterizing them. They speak for themselves." Moss turned to Bowman. "Officer Bowman," he said, "at the moment you placed Mr. Caldwell in handcuffs, what specific articulable fact gave you reasonable suspicion that a crime had been, was being, or was about to be committed?" Bowman looked at his hands. The thumb was motionless against the table surface. The ring did not move. "He was standing there," Bowman said. The room held that silence for a very long time. The hearing ran for 2 hours and 17 minutes. The panel recessed without a finding, and the recessed portion was going to take days, and in the meantime Travis Bowman was placed on administrative leave pending deliberation. His union rep told him this was standard procedure. Bowman went home. He did not call anyone from the department. He did what his union rep had told him to do, which was nothing, and he found that doing nothing when your career is in formal review is a form of punishment entirely distinct from the more obvious kinds, because it gives you unlimited time to sit in the room where you have always been certain of your own authority, and listen to how quiet it gets when that certainty is in question. On the day the panel recessed, something else happened in the 5th District substation that no one sent Bowman a text about, but that everyone who was in the building that afternoon would remember. Bowman had left a half-full locker at the station, a spare uniform, a pair of patrol boots, a coffee mug with the department insignia that he had kept there for 12 years. Standard procedure during administrative leave required him to clear it. He came in at 4 p.m. after most of the day shift had returned and walked down the familiar fluorescent corridor to the locker room. The locker room was not empty. Greer was at his locker when Bowman came in. He looked up and then he looked back down at his locker, and he did not say anything. Prater was on the bench, pulling on his second boot, and he looked up and then he looked at the floor, and he did not say anything either. 2 other officers Bowman had worked alongside for a combined 30 years were in various stages of changing, and they looked, and they went back to what they were doing, and no one said a word. Not a greeting, not a nod, not the usual low-grade banter of men who have shared a locker room for years. Just the sound of metal locker doors and boot soles on tile, and the ventilation system doing its work, and Bowman moving through it alone. He took down the spare uniform. He took the boots. He picked up the coffee mug and looked at it for a moment. 12 years every morning, shift the ceramic faded on one side from the microwave, and then he put it in his bag. He closed the locker. The sound of it echoed in a way it had never echoed before, or perhaps it always had, and he had never noticed, because there had always been noise to cover it. He walked out without looking back. That silence was its own verdict rendered by the people who knew him best, and it followed him to his car and rode with him all the way home. Claire Odom published her first story on day 47, front page of the Harland Courier's digital edition. The timeline discrepancy. The body cam upload against the incident report's claimed sync failure. The FOIA email on page 17. And the radio transmission quoted in full in its own paragraph with no commentary around it. Not yet. Let me see what he's got. By noon, 2 regional outlets had republished it. By evening, it was national. Roy Casper read the story at his desk the next morning. He read the radio transmission quoted in the 3rd paragraph. The toothpick in the corner of his mouth went completely still. After a long moment, he picked up his phone and called a number he had not called in 8 days. "They have the email," he said. The voice on the other end, "Which version?" "The redacted one. But they asked for the unredacted. The county attorney denied the request. The denial is in the hearing record." 5 seconds of silence. "Sit tight." The call ended. Casper put his phone face down on his desk. He looked at the photo of his daughter on the far corner, 9 years old, in the photograph 15 now, and he sat there for a long time without opening a document or adding to any log or making any further call. The panel's findings arrived on day 51, 4 pages, signed by all 3 members. 4 findings against Bowman: failure to articulate specific, reasonable suspicion before initiating the detention. Timeline in the incident report inconsistent with physical evidence from 2 independent sources. Radio transmission sequencing indicating probable cause was intended to follow rather than precede the detention. And the IIA investigation not conducted in a manner consistent with procedural standards, specifically noting the failure to request third-party footage. The failure to interview the complainant and the assignment of the matter to an investigator whose prior case pattern with respect to the subject officer created a conflict. Recommended actions: Bowman suspended without pay for 45 days with a criminal referral to the state attorney under 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Casper immediately transferred to a non-investigative administrative role pending a separate internal review. Foyle's conduct flagged with a formal request for the unredacted email forwarded to the State Attorney General's office, an independent 5-year audit of the department's entire complaint record. Bowman read the findings in his kitchen, standing at the counter. The criminal referral was the line his eyes kept returning to because Mercer had told him it would probably not happen. He had taken that probably and held it and refused to examine it. 1 parking lot, 1 man, 6 words. Roy Casper submitted his retirement paperwork on day 66, 21 years of service pension, vested, filed through the HR portal at 11:14 a.m., with the same quiet, methodical efficiency that had characterized everything he had ever done inside this institution. Approved by end of business the same day. He cleared his desk that afternoon without drama, packing each item with the careful, practical attention of a person who has made a decision and is no longer negotiating with it. The department issued no statement. His union rep issued one on his behalf. Detective Casper has served the Harland County PD with dedication for over 2 decades. He has decided to pursue retirement and wishes the department and his colleagues well. The wish was noted. Its sincerity was not widely assessed. But before he was done, he did one last thing. At 11:47 p.m. on the night he cleared his desk, long after the building had gone to its overnight skeleton crew, long after the third floor had gone dark, a computer terminal in the administrative records office showed a 9-minute login under Casper's credentials. One file was accessed, not modified, not deleted, read. Someone had come back to look at something one final time, not to change it, but to see it in the way that people sometimes need to see a thing they cannot undo before they close the door on it for good. The access log would not be reviewed until the Federal Monitor's audit team ran their first sweep of administrative terminal activity 41 days later, at which point it would be one line in a spreadsheet of 11,000 lines flagged automatically and waiting for human attention. It waited. As everything in this story had waited. The body cam file in the overflow partition, the preservation letter in the folder, the FOIA email with its single visible line. All of it had waited for someone with the patience to build a record piece by piece over 6 weeks in a $2 notebook, while the machine designed to prevent accountability ran its familiar playbook. Claire Odom published her second story on day 58. Not narrative this time data. 5 years of complaint records analyzed by demographic category. 71% of investigative stops resulting in detention without charges came from Black residents. Black residents made up 39% of Harlan County's population. The disparity was not explained by arrest rate or crime geography. She had checked both. She did not editorialize. She put the numbers next to each other and let readers do the arithmetic. Commissioner Roy Tolman's phone rang for 6 hours after publication. 3 council members introduced a measure for an independent civilian oversight board with subpoena authority before the week was out. Linda Foyle was still in her office. Her name was still on the door. Pruitt was still monitoring the situation, the language of a man who had learned which things could be delayed and was exercising that knowledge. The unredacted email was still sealed. The state AG had filed a formal request to override the exemption. The county attorney had responded with a brief. The exchange was ongoing, the way these exchanges are always ongoing when the document at the center is damaging enough that one side will spend considerable resources keeping it sealed, while the other side works to open it. Marcus was in his apartment on Weston Drive reading the panel's findings at his kitchen table with the morning light coming in low and flat. He read all 4 findings with the steady attention of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has been allowed finally to set part of it down. He put the findings on the table beside the blue notebook, 61 pages plus the pages he had added since. He did not open it. He sat with his coffee and looked at it from the outside the way you look at something you built that has just done what you needed it to do. Then he picked up his phone, typed 4 words to Sandra Webb's number, panel findings received. Thank you, set it down, got up to make more coffee. The notebook sat on the table in the morning light. The case authorization code written in pencil on the inside back cover had not changed. The pages had filled up the way all pages fill up one line at a time, one entry at a time, with patience and specificity and the stubborn insistence that what happens should be recorded accurately, regardless of who would prefer it wasn't. That was all it had ever been. That was all it had needed to be. Prosecutor Alicia Drummond received the criminal referral on a Monday and read the body cam transcript 3 times before doing anything else. She played the audio after the 3rd reading and listened to the 6 words with her elbows on the desk and her chin resting on her folded hands. And then she called her supervisor. "This one has a problem," she said. "They all have a problem. What's the specific one?" The audio makes the sequence unambiguous. He detained and then went looking for cause. That's backwards under Terry. And the federal status of the subject under Section 242 makes the civil rights angle significant. I think we have a prosecutable case. Her supervisor was quiet. The union will fight it. They always fight it. A longer pause. It's an election year, Alicia. She looked at the transcript on her desk, the single line in the middle she had underlined with a pencil, the way Marcus had once underlined 2 words in an incident report. She looked at her supervisor's implicit request from the other side of the phone call and called it by its name quietly and only to herself. "I know," she said. "I'm going to file it anyway." She filed the charging recommendation 48 hours later. Mercer attempted a qualified immunity defense in writing. Drummond responded in a single paragraph that was precise to the point of being almost gentle in its dismissal. Qualified immunity applied to civil litigation under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, not to criminal prosecution under 18 U.S.C. Section 242. The Harlow Standard was not a shield against criminal charges. The motion conflated two distinct bodies of law. The motion was denied. The state attorney announced on day 81 that criminal charges would be filed against Travis Bowman, deprivation of rights under color of law, 1 count. The press release used no adjectives that were not required by grammar. Bowman was arraigned 11 days later. He pleaded not guilty, was released on his own recognizance, and emerged from the courthouse with Mercer beside him to face reporters gathered on the steps. Mercer's statement was organized and professional. His client had exercised reasonable judgment in the field and looked forward to presenting his case at trial. Mercer's voice was steady. His eyes were not quite meeting the cameras pointed at him. Linda Foyle had still not issued a statement. 3 council members had sent a 4th letter to Pruitt. Pruitt had responded that the matter was under active review, which was an upgrade from monitoring, and indicated that the weight of accumulated pressure had become sufficient to require a slightly different verb. Claire Odom sat at her desk reading the arraignment filing, composing in her head the questions for a 6th story about the 5-year complaint pattern, not about Bowman specifically, but about what the numbers looked like when you arranged them as a structure rather than as individual incidents. She had a source meeting in 2 hours. She had a message in her locked desk drawer at home from an anonymous sender subject line, page 17, containing 1 sentence. The attachment referenced in that email was a schedule not of locations of people. She had read it 6 times and had not replied. She was going to report it correctly or not at all, and reporting it correctly was going to take time that she was willing to take. The federal courthouse in downtown Tampa was the kind of building designed to communicate permanence marble floors that absorbed sound and gave it back altered ceilings high enough that voices carried differently than in ordinary rooms. The federal seal behind the judge's bench serving as a silent reminder that the institution conducting business here intends to outlast every person in it. The trial of United States versus Bowman opened on a Monday in early spring, and the gallery was full from the first day. Claire Odom was in the press row. Sandra Webb was in the gallery 3rd row from the back in her gray blazer. Frank Tillman sat in the middle of the room in his good jacket, still slightly dazed about how a preservation letter he had printed in 9 minutes had led him to a federal courthouse 300 miles from his mall. Karen Hollis was 2 rows behind him, having received a subpoena that she had read 4 times before accepting that it was real. Travis Bowman, at the defense table, had lost weight that had not needed to go anywhere, and gained a pallor that months of administrative leave and suspension and the grinding daily uncertainty of pre-trial proceedings had settled into him like weather. Without the uniform and the badge and the precinct behind him, he sat in a plain, dark suit with his hands flat on the table and his thumb motionless against his finger. Prosecutor Alicia Drummond built the case piece by piece with the methodical patience of someone who understands that federal juries are persuaded by sequence and documentation rather than by theater. She put up the Lot D footage from column K7, continuous from 8:21 p.m., showing 11 minutes of Marcus standing beside his car, hands visible, doing nothing. Not 20 minutes. 11. She let the jury watch every one of them in silence. She played the body cam audio from BWC 338 through the courtroom speakers, filling the marble-floored room with the outdoor acoustics of a parking lot at night, ambient traffic. The flat evening air, 2 voices. She played it without narrating over it, without explaining what they were about to hear, because the audio explained itself. She paused the recording at 4 minutes and 23 seconds. She looked at the jury. She looked at them for 3 full seconds without speaking, not performing the silence, simply allowing it the way you allow something to settle before you speak about it. Then she pressed play. Unit 22 to dispatch. Got one in custody. Loitering, suspicious. Bringing him in. Copy that, 22. Any charges? Not yet. Let me see what he's got. She stopped the audio. She let the 6 words sit in the air of the courtroom for 7 seconds. Long enough for the gallery to feel them. Long enough for the jury to hear them a second time in the echo of their own minds. Then she said quietly and precisely, "This is not about what Officer Bowman thought Marcus Caldwell was doing in that parking lot. This is about what those 6 words tell us about the order in which things happened. The handcuffs came first. The question of what to charge him with came second. In the United States of America, that order is not a procedural technicality. That order is the violation." Mercer's defense was organized and professionally argued. He built a framework around the word, yet suggesting it indicated a procedural sequence, rather than an admission that cause was constructed after the fact that Bowman had been operating on 19 years of pattern recognition in a commercial parking lot at night, that the Terry standard permitted exactly the kind of judgment call Bowman had made. It was a reasonable argument. It would have been a sufficient argument in a different case with different evidence. But Drummond called Sandra Webb as the final witness before resting, and Webb took the stand in her gray blazer and testified in the measured and precise language of a federal supervisor who has given operational briefings many times to the nature of Marcus's deployment to the 14 months of work that Bowman's 4-second decision in a parking lot had disrupted, and to the costs, operational, financial, investigative, of the 5-week timeline acceleration that had followed. When Mercer cross-examined her professionally and carefully, she answered each question with the same unhurried precision she had brought to the hearing room. She gave him exactly what the record supported, and nothing that it did not. When the cross-examination ended, and Mercer sat back down, the courtroom was quiet in the particular way of a room that has just watched someone try to find a crack in something and come away without one. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 11 minutes. When the forewoman stood, Bowman was at the defense table with his hands flat on the surface in front of him, his thumb motionless, the ring on his finger catching the courtroom light, the way it had caught the sodium lamp in Lot D on a Tuesday night, 19 years into a career that had just in 4 hours and 11 minutes been decided. On the count of deprivation of rights under color of law under 18 United States Code Section 242. The forewoman said, her voice level and clear. "We, the jury, find the defendant Travis Bowman guilty." Bowman closed his eyes, not dramatically. Not with a gasp or a flinch or any of the visible collapses that films give to men receiving verdicts. He simply closed his eyes very slowly, the way a person closes their eyes when the thing they were hoping would not arrive has arrived, and the hoping is over, and there is only the thing itself. The ring on his finger sat still and did not move. The sentencing hearing was held 3 weeks after the verdict, and the gallery was full again, and the press row held 12 reporters where it had held 8 during the trial, and outside on the courthouse plaza, the satellite trucks sat in the patient proprietary arrangement of institutions that have decided something is worth covering until it is completely finished. Inside the marble floors and the high ceilings and the federal seal, and the aggressive air conditioning of a building that maintains a steady 68 degrees regardless of season, combine to create the atmosphere that federal sentencing hearings are designed to create: the cold, permanent gravity of institutional consequence, the feeling that whatever is decided in this room is going to be written down in a way that will not be revised. Travis Bowman sat at the defense table in a plain dark suit, and without the uniform and the badge and the duty belt and the patrol car and the 19 years of institutional weight that had made him what he was. Inside all of it, he occupied his chair with a quietness that was different from patience, different from composure. It was the specific quietness of a man who has run out of the energy that animated a certain kind of life, and who is sitting in the room where the accounting for that life is about to be completed. His hands were flat on the table. The ring was on his finger. The thumb was still. In the gallery, Frank Tillman in his good jacket. Karen Hollis, who had found a body cam file in an overflow partition and forwarded a maintenance flag to her supervisor, and who was discovering today that small, precise acts of doing your job correctly can travel much farther than you expect. Claire Odom, pen moving. And in the back row, still and quiet, Sandra Webb. Judge Raymond Voss adjusted his glasses, looked at the pre-sentencing report, and then looked at Bowman with the expression of a man who is not angry but is tired, the particular earned tiredness of 16 years on the federal bench watching people with authority misuse it and appear in front of him afterward. "Will the defendant please rise?" Bowman stood. Mercer stood beside him, close enough to be present. "Travis Bowman," Judge Voss began in a voice that was not raised and did not need to be because the room was perfectly silent and had been since before the gavel came down. "You were issued a badge, a firearm, and an oath. Those three things together represent something that democratic society extends to very few of its members, the legal authority to restrict the freedom of your fellow citizens. It is not a privilege. It is not a reward for service. It is a loan made in trust against the promise that it will be used only as the law permits and only in the service of the people it was given to protect." Bowman looked at the judge. His jaw moved slightly. He did not speak. "On the night of the arrest," Voss continued, "you drove into a parking lot and looked at a man and decided in 4 seconds before you had spoken a single word to him, before he had done a single thing that any law prohibits, that he was someone you needed to deal with. You made that decision based on what he looked like and where he was standing, and 19 years of doing this to people who did not have the resources or the documentation or the federal backing to make it cost you anything." He paused, letting the room hold the sentence. "And when this court asked you in a formal proceeding to identify the single specific articulable fact that gave you reasonable suspicion to detain Marcus Caldwell, you said under oath that he was standing there." He looked at Bowman over his reading glasses. "He was standing there in a legally parked car's space in a commercial parking lot within posted operating hours, doing nothing that any statute prohibits, and that was the basis you brought to this court. Not an observed behavior, not a specific fact. He was standing there, and you decided that was enough, because for 19 years it had been enough because no one had made it cost anything before." Bowman's hands, flat on the defense table, pressed slightly harder against the surface. The only visible sign. "You had behind you the full power of the state and the presumption of your community's trust," Voss said. "You used both to follow a man who was waiting in a parking lot and handcuff him before you had decided what to charge him with. And then you said into a radio transmission that your own department's equipment recorded and preserved without your knowledge." "Not yet. Let me see what he's got." He let the 6 words sit in the air of the courtroom the same way Drummond had let them sit 6 weeks earlier. "Not the law requires. Not there is reason to believe. Not yet. As though the law were something you were going to get around to if the search produced results." Pruitt in the gallery looked at the floor. Casper was not present. He had not been invited and had not attempted to attend. "Under 18 United States Code Section 242, Voss continued, "and taking into consideration the nature of the violation, the documented operational harm to a federal investigation, the pattern of prior conduct reviewed in the pre-sentencing material, and the absence of any credible acknowledgement of wrongdoing, I sentence you to 36 months in the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons to be followed by 2 years of supervised release. Your law enforcement certification in the state of Florida is hereby permanently revoked. Your pension benefits are forfeited in their entirety. You will pay restitution in the amount of $14,000 representing the documented federal operational costs caused by your actions." He picked up the gavel. "Court is adjourned." The gavel came down, and the sound of it moved through the marble and the cold air and the high light of the room, and meant in that moment exactly what it was designed to mean, a door closing. The federal marshals came forward. Bowman stood for a moment, not frozen, just still in the way of a man who is completing something before he moves. Then he turned, and his hands went behind his back, and the handcuffs clicked shut. Cold metal, the same ratchet sound that had clicked in Lot D on a Tuesday night, except on different wrists for a different reason in a room full of people who had watched it happen and understood why. The ring glinted once under the courtroom light as his wrist turned. Then it was still. In the back row, Sandra Webb watched him led out through the side door. She did not stand. She sat with her hands in her lap until the door closed behind him, and then she buttoned her blazer, picked up her briefcase, and walked out of the courtroom into the afternoon light with the measured, purposeful walk of a person who has finished one thing and has others waiting. She had work to do. 3 months after the sentencing, Harlan County had changed in the way that places change after something permanent happens. Not transformed, not restored, but altered in the specific way. A fracture alters what it passes through, leaving everything standing but with a line running through it that was not there before and will not be erased. A federal consent agreement between the Harlan County Police Department and the Florida AG's office came into effect on day 91. New body camera policy with mandatory upload verification. I. A complaint assignment. Reform. Preventing repeat assignment of complaints involving the same officer to the same investigator. Demographic tracking of every investigative stop resulting in no charges. Mandatory supervisory review within 72 hours. Process changes. Documentation changes. Audit mechanisms. Whether those mechanisms would have teeth, whether the supervisory reviews would be genuine or procedural, was the question the next 18 months would answer, or fail to answer. A federal monitor named Carol Beaumont was appointed, a woman who had done this work in 2 other jurisdictions and had learned to distinguish between departments where policy changes produced real behavioral shifts and departments where compliance existed on paper, and the culture beneath it moved almost not at all. She made a note on her first day to find out what happened to Marcus Caldwell. The kind of thing he had done quietly, carefully, without resources, against a machine designed to outlast exactly that kind of effort, was worth understanding. Roy Casper was at home, retired pension intact, no charges filed yet. The unredacted email was still sealed. The state AG's formal request to override the exemption was still in administrative proceedings. Pending was not the same as closed. It never was. What was certain was that the existence of the email, the date, the subject line, the single visible line of Foyle's reply was now in the public record of a federal proceeding, and public records do not disappear because someone would prefer them to. Linda Foyle's name was still on the door. Pruitt was still monitoring. These things moved at the speed they moved. Claire Odom was at her desk working on her 5th story with a folder in her locked desk drawer at home containing 11 documents and a message that began, "Not of locations, of people." She was not going to rush the story that message was the beginning of. She had learned across 4 years and 41 FOIA requests that the stories worth telling are the ones you are willing to take the time to tell correctly. She opened a new document. She typed the date. She began. Marcus packed on day 85 3 boxes, the same 3 he had arrived with plus 1 additional box for the books he had accumulated in 14 months in one place, which he organized for transport with the slightly self-conscious care of a person who knows this is not strictly necessary and cannot quite stop doing it anyway. He returned his key to Dale, the superintendent, who shook his hand without asking where he was going. Marcus appreciated this, the specific, understated courtesy of a man who understands the value of not asking certain questions. He drove past Harlan Square Mall on his way to the highway. Lot D was visible from the road. The far end of the north lot, the yellow sodium lamps column K7-22 occupied this morning by a gray minivan with a magnetic sign on the driver's door. An ordinary Tuesday, a person's car parked legally in a commercial lot before 9 a.m. Marcus did not slow down. He looked at the space for exactly as long as it occupied the passenger window frame, 4 seconds, maybe 5, and then looked at the road ahead. He had a debrief in Tampa in 3 days, then a reassignment review, then 2 weeks of transition time that was in practice leave the necessary kind. the kind that follows a deployment that has required careful precision for a long time, and leaves a person needing to find the version of themselves that exists outside that precision. He had taken similar leave twice before. He knew what it involved, running in the morning, sleeping past 6, reading books that were not part of any file, and the gradual process of reconnecting with the ordinary texture of his own life. It always came back. It had always come back. He thought, in the long open silence of I-75 northbound, with the windows down, and the radio off, about the 11 minutes he had stood in Lot D before Bowman's cruiser arrived. He had been waiting for someone. That person had watched a patrol car enter the lot and walked away, and he had never met them, and the operation had moved past that meeting point before it could be rescheduled. 14 months of careful work, and the moment it turned on was a restless cop, a slow Tuesday, and a man rolling his wedding ring on his finger while deciding that stillness was suspicious. He thought about the blue notebooks, 15 of them now, in a box in the trunk, each one with a case authorization code in pencil on the inside back cover. Not journals. Records. The kind of documentation that exists not to remember the past, but to make the past provable, which was what it had been, which was what it had needed to be. He thought about Bowman's face in the hearing room when Sandra Webb said the word Clearwater, the way the color had left him, the way his thumb had stopped on the ring for the first time, the way 19 years of certainty had moved through his face like weather. He did not feel satisfaction about it exactly. He felt the specific, quiet, practical relief of a person who has documented something correctly and watched the documentation do what documentation is supposed to do. He reached the highway merge and put on his signal and changed lanes and drove north. And Harlan County fell away behind him, and the road ahead was long and clear, and the morning sun was behind him and warm on the back of his neck. And somewhere in a federal institution in Georgia, a man was beginning to understand in the small, concrete, daily way of federal incarceration what it costs to look at someone and decide in 4 seconds what they are. The road stretched out ahead. Marcus drove. 2 weeks after the sentencing, Claire Odom parked in Lot D, Space 22. She sat in her car for a few minutes without getting out, looking at column K7 and the camera mounted above it, and she was not there for any specific journalistic reason. She was there because she had covered enough stories that required her to go and stand in the place where something happened, because standing there does something that reading about it cannot, gives it a weight and a dimension and a specific gravity that the documents alone do not fully convey. A man had stood here and done his job quietly in a dark jacket with a $2 notebook in his glove compartment. A job that no one in this lot, this mall, this county knew about. He had been patient and careful and methodical, and a man with a badge had rolled into this parking lot and looked at him and made a decision. In 4 seconds, the same decision he had made dozens of times before, in dozens of parking lots and streets and sidewalks. The decision that had always cost nothing. From that one decision made in 4 seconds, driven by 19 years of being allowed to make it, had come a formal complaint, a body cam file in an overflow partition, a signed preservation letter, a hearing, a criminal referral, a federal trial, a 36-month sentence, a consent agreement, and a federal monitor now spending her days inside the department measuring whether the documentation requirements were changing anything real. Not because the institution had worked, because one person inside it had refused to let the record disappear. She started her car and drove east. At the Federal Correctional Institution in Jessup, Georgia, Travis Bowman was inmate 62847. He had been assigned to kitchen prep 4:30 a.m., start 14 cents an hour, the unglamorous leveling work of an institution that does not distinguish between who you were and who you are. His wedding ring had been confiscated at intake and inventoried in a clear plastic bag with the rest of his personal effects. He could feel the groove it had worn into his right thumb when the lights went out at night. 19 years of slow, deliberate friction, a channel in the flesh of his own hand that he had never noticed until the ring was not there to fill it. He pressed his left thumb into the groove, sometimes in the dark. It was deeper than he had expected it to be. On his second week, a corrections officer who had done 2 years of contract work in Harland County before transferring to the federal system walked past his table in the cafeteria and stopped and looked at him. The way Bowman had once looked at men he had already decided about the same slow, deliberate, proprietary look. The look that says, "I see you and I have already decided," and then moved on without a word. Bowman's hand found the groove in his thumb and held it there for the rest of the afternoon, pressing a ring that was no longer there into a space that remembered its shape exactly. 6 months after the sentencing, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, a young black man stood at the edge of Lot D with a cup of coffee and his car keys, watching his phone. He had been there 8 minutes. He was waiting for a friend who had texted to say he was running late. A Harland County patrol car rolled into the far end of the lot, slowed, and came alongside him. The man looked up. The officer was young, maybe 26, with the careful, earnest expression of someone who is still figuring out what kind of officer to be. He rolled down his window. "Everything okay out here?" he asked. "Need any help?" The man said he was fine, just waiting. The officer nodded. "Take your time," he said, and drove on. The young man watched the cruiser go, then looked back at his phone. His friend had texted again. Be there in 2. He sipped his coffee. A small thing. A completely ordinary thing. After everything that had happened in this lot, in this county, starting from one Tuesday night, and a man deciding in 4 seconds what he saw after all of it, an ordinary thing was everything. If this story showed you something about what accountability actually looks like, not overnight, not cleanly, not completely, but with patience and documentation and the refusal to let the record disappear, share it with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories where the truth outlasts the people who tried to bury it.